I think that you have to consider like where America is right now. Like America is not in the midst of a battle between like MLs and libertarian socialists. It's a battle between like the moderate left and the extremely far right. Like that is the battle for the soul of America that's taking place right now. And you know, like it or not, bread tube figures, people like ContraPoints, Philosophy Tube, Vosh, etc., whatever you may think of them, they are successful in moving at least parts of the internet more towards left-leaning ideas. I mean, you know, ContraPoints was featured in the New York Times. Bosch is a slowly rising figure who I imagine will get even more and more prominent as time goes on. These people change minds, and when people's minds are changed, they vote in a different way, they act in a different way. They're more willing to consider politicians and political figures who might act more in their interest, like for example Bernie Sanders or the Squad. What's some other stuff? And like the thing is that as far as them like advocating for campaigning and voting for Biden, I would argue that in that case that was a necessity. You know, now, did they spend too much time advocating for that? Probably, but I do think that on a number of very serious issues facing this country, from climate change to healthcare to COVID-19 to LGBT rights to immigration to taxation to even foreign policy in a number of areas, I would say that Biden was demonstrably better than Trump in a myriad of different ways. And I think that just from the consequentialist perspective, we should vote for him on that issue. Now, that doesn't mean that once he's in power, we should ruthlessly criticize him for the many terrible things he will likely do. Of course we should, and we will, I imagine, or at least I will. I don't know, maybe you're right. Maybe they are just cucks to the Democratic Party, but I hope that they will legitimately criticize the Democrats and Biden, as I will, when they do things that I do not.
Thank you. Now, regarding this issue of the threat of the far right, it seems you missed the point I was trying to raise, though, is that instead of conceiving the fundamental contradictions on ideological terms, I agree the primary contradiction isn't between MLs and other leftists or between leftists, but it's also ridiculous to say the primary contradiction is even between leftists and rightists. This is an ideological view and not a materialistic and class-based view. The far right encompasses a lot of things. It also encompasses masses who are willing to follow leaders, professing to be populistic, anti-establishment forces. I don't see what is so essential about the rightist ideology. I don't see ideology as the essence. I see material reality and class relations as the essence. If working masses are following right-wing leaders, okay, then the essential thing isn't to combat right-wing ideology specifically, but it's to pose an alternative that is able to better clarify the position of the American working people, the more essential reason why they follow right-wing leaders, to clarify this, distill the essence of this, and ultimately that's what Marxism and communism is about. When one can succeed in doing this, they won't have a reason to support the far right and the right-wing populists. They will see communists as a better alternative. So we're not interested primarily in debating the far right, although we are open to debating the right, and maybe there is some merit in debating right-wingers, but it is superfluous to go after the far right, and it is superfluous to go after right-wingers or some kind of main enemy, and it's a cop-out from the fundamental contradictions that are not only internal to the left, but are internal to the superficial allegiances people have to the left, to the superficial ideologies that define the left. There are internal contradictions with those opportunisms that need to be sorted out. Otherwise, we don't even know what our own position is in the first place. To say that we all need to rally against the far right assumes that we both agree and we know what our own position is. I disagree that we know what our position is. The only way we can know our position is by participating in the gladiator arena that will sort out which current and which splinter of the so-called left speaks for the working people of America, and the measure of that is how many people, both from the far right, both from the right, and both from the apolitical crowd, are willing to join in. As far as I'm concerned, there are people who are supporters of infrared who came from right-wing backgrounds, 4chan and poll backgrounds, and we won them over. We succeeded in winning them over without attacking the right. Now, I discussed with Xander Hall the fact that you can't do what Vosh and Destiny do, which is gaslight right-wing people about the original alienation that gives rise to their reactionary views and just tell them to accept and submit to the establishment. You have to give new expression and new form to their anti-establishment sentiment that will allow them to see past the reactionary prejudices and dogmas. And that's my view of what an effective way of countering so-called right-wing populism is.
And as far as the idea that like we're not in a war over ideology, we're in a war for the interests of the working class. I mean, ideology plays a factor in what the conditions of the working class are. If you elect a fascist government, the conditions of the working class are going to be worse than the conditions for a socialist or a social democratic government.
Now, regarding this business about ideology playing a factor, I actually don't think ideology plays a factor in the way you're trying to describe it. When you're an ideologist, as an individual, then ideology does play a factor. But insofar as it is relating to the masses, ideology is not what is decisive whatsoever. People can switch and flip from being Trump supporters, hold me to this, to communists quite easily. It's just that communists have to formulate the interests of the working masses who were Trump supporters and QAnon supporters in a more effective way than the right-wing ideologists have been doing. And if they can do that, I guarantee you those people will flock over to forces and ideologies that on a superficial level of the political spectrum are diametrically opposed to the ones they currently are under. That's because the political spectrum isn't dialectical. It abstractly represents political differences and ideological differences, but does not relate to or regard the actual essential reason for those differences, which is why you have paradoxes and ironies like the so-called horseshoe paradox. You have these so-called paradoxes because the political spectrum, which you're referring to, that defines, that is supposedly the essence of political difference, is actually estranged from its true and real and material essence. It can appear that right-wing and left-wing overlap and are indistinguishable oftentimes, especially when we're talking about ambiguous anti-establishment sentiment, such as Occupy Wall Street. The whole anti-establishment Occupy Wall Street sentiment could easily be manifested in terms of anti-Semitism, and it could also be manifested in terms of something else. That's why socialists in the past, actually, onto this topic of anti-Semitism, since infrared is strangely accused of this, people like August Bebel called anti-Semitism the socialism of fools for this reason. And actually, that's always what authentic socialists have regarded reactionary rightists as. Foolish socialists and failed socialists. We don't see them as existential enemies. We see them as failed socialists, and our goal is to be successful socialists.